Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gifts, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, son. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome, glad to have you here. Oh look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee. You sure? It's cultist coffee. What makes it cultist coffee? I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it. Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning. No camera. Hang on. There we go. Camera's on now. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the office. How are you feeling this morning? I hope you're feeling really good. I am. I was up today. At the time I am supposed to be up, so I've been feeling good. I've been sitting here working. I was working on a little bit of RPG writing, but also just, man, I am so behind in getting everything done with, whoa! Well, I'm still here. Still behind on getting so many things done, but I was starting to get things cleaned up off the to-do list. Still lots of stuff still going on, though. How about you? Let's see. Let me see. All right. So, good morning, Michael and Charlie. Good morning. It is Tuesday, so we're going to be talking about RPG design. Trying to get back on that. Maybe, so we may need a couple of weeks, a couple of days a week to do that. But we're trying to get back to world building Wednesday and then RPG design today. And I want to talk about resistances and opposed roles. And that's why I've been meaning to talk about that for a while, but I'm feeling like I can tackle it today. We'll just see. I could be wrong. I've got a particular theory that I need to talk out. So we'll just see about opposed roles and see how they work, because I've got different opinions on them, and I need to know which one's right. So we'll just talk about it here. Hey, Zero the Blade. Good morning, and BGD. Let's see. Robert and Mike Hansford. I feel like my software is running a bit sluggish at the moment. Maybe it'll fix itself. Robert, good morning. Sable Phoenix. Good morning, James and Brent. Good morning. Good morning. Please do, if you're here, please do like and subscribe. Thank you, Micah. Let's see. All right. Good morning to everybody. Okay, so we are approaching. I was still trying to get some different YouTube thumbnails up and running, and I was not able to get them all yet. But we've got a show tonight. Now I've changed what the show has to be. So I'm changing what the show has to be tonight, because Brianna called me yesterday afternoon and asked if we could delay doing Dark Knight. We were going to take a look at the Dark Knight. That's been requested by the community, do a deep dive into Dark Knight. But she called me yesterday and said she was still trying to watch the Dark Knight. I mean, again, in preparation for the show. I still had to do that as well, but she was like, I'm trying to watch. And she was also wanting to go through the screenplay and was reading the script and taking notes. And she was like, I just can't be ready for this tomorrow. Do you mind if we delay until next week? So I said, no, I don't mind. Let's see if we can get somebody else or get some other topic and get someone else in here to discuss tonight. So tonight, another thing that we talked about that we need to do on Table Talk was talk about Moana, because we've got Doug, of course. Doug will be here with us tonight, and he's got his heroine's journey, his heroine's labyrinth theory. But then Moana, we talked about. Now, hey, we've got some elements here, but I think that Moana is pretty much the hero's journey, and it's also very similar to Star Wars: A New Hope. So I really enjoyed that movie. So we're going to be talking about Moana tonight, and I've invited Lou Anders. Oh, speaking of which, is Lou on did his Kickstarter begin? Lou is a friend of mine, and if you have been here looking at the early Table Talks, Lou is my first Table Talk guest. He is the author of the Thrones and Bones series. He independently published his own RPG. He's gotten a book contract to write for Star Wars. So Lou is pretty awesome, and he has great insight into this. And he has insight into Moana and discussing why Moana works, and also its similarity to Star Wars and the hero's journey. So Lou's going to be here tonight, as well as Doug. So we're going to be doing that tonight. That'll be tonight at 7 Central. I got to get that together. I get the links together for them and for you guys. But that'll be tonight. If you are part of the Raven Keep Discord server, I will put out a announcement on the Raven Keep Discord server. So let me put that right over here, Raven Keep Discord server. So, and he's going live on Kickstarter today for more stories built in his world. So he has really hit the ground running and has been making some amazing stuff developing his world. So I don't think that must not be live yet, but he said he was going live today, and so he'll be talking about that, and he'll be on our live stream tonight as well. The Goodnight Sword Kickstarter. So that's tonight. So tomorrow morning will be World Building Wednesday. Tomorrow night, instead of getting the members only live stream started, which I'm thinking is going to be Wednesday nights, I've got another guest tomorrow, Natalie from, no, excuse me, not Natalie. It's Natalie and Michelle who are part of Force of Light Entertainment, but Michelle is actually going to be the one that is with us tomorrow night. So at 7 Central, we're going to be discussing good and evil in storytelling and what that means in society, which is a topic that we've been discussed with lots of people. Lou was in on that discussion early on. We've also talked with Cameron, who is comes at this from the Muslim side of things. And so she is a minister of, I'm not sure what Christian denomination, we will find out. And she just did a PhD in theology. So I thought she would be a good person to talk about good, evil storytelling, its relationship to society, what that reflects on society, how our relationship with good and evil has changed. I think that'll be a great conversation. That's tomorrow at 7:30 Central. The Goodnight Sword Kickstarter will end on Thursday. And so we're going to have a wind down kind of party hangout live stream Thursday night. Good Night Sword right here. We've got 43 people involved. I appreciate everybody who has come out for Good Night Sword, who has been part of the morning grind. Good Night Sword is the first book out in the Tales of Rapavania, one of the worlds we're developing. It's for the youngest audience, obviously, the world of gallantry, chivalry, and rabbits, based on the classic story of Good Night Moon. And it's illustrated by Adam Botsford. You can get digital copies, but the physical copies, I'm about to order some. So I have them, especially here, to go ahead and get some of the copies that are going to be signed. I appreciate everyone who has been signing up to get the signed copies, especially. I'm going to go ahead and place an order for some of the books. They can go ahead and get on their way and get here, and that way I can start signing them. And this has been a low drama Kickstarter. Easy. Open it up. Get the books to people who would like it, and then we're going to move on to do more Kickstarters in different worlds for games and stuff. But this is opening up, and if you want to check it out in more detail, or even if you have a child tonight who you might like to be listening to Good Night Sword, there's an animated audiobook of Good Night Sword embedded in the page, so you can check it out and be watching it tonight. So we'll do a live stream to close that out on Thursday, and then also, let's see, Friday, well, we'll be back here on the morning grind, but then Friday night, we've got the dinner and a board game. I'll be solo playing Hero Quest again. So that's like, we got morning and evening live streams all the way from today, all the way until Friday. So there is a lot going on. I was asked to bring up, I do have something else that's going on. This is pretty sad. And I realized this. Dax Rocker, who you may have seen on some of the shows, if you've been around for like the past, ever since last year, and you're watching the General Geekdom, we were having discussions for General Geekdom. Dax Rocker was on General Geekdom, but of course, Dax Rocker is also the guy who plays Rob. Dax Rocker plays Rob. This I don't know if this is a GoFundMe, but whatever technical brand it is. I just found out yesterday, that his house burned down. So Dax Rocker plays Rob in The Cultists. He's the guy with the fish on his head. So he's in the intro of all of this. Say that again? So he's in the intro, and his house just burned down. You know, I feel like I've encountered a number of people whose houses have burned down recently, and especially so the people moved in next to me because their house burned down, and so they had to have someplace else to live. And so they moved in next door because they had a house burned down. And then Brianna's house burned down. That was what, last year, or the year, it was that last year? It took her forever. Brianna's house burned down. I mean, she was renting that house. So she was renting the house, but still lost all of her stuff, everything like that. And then all of a sudden you don't have a house. So Brianna's the co-writer and director of The Cultists. And so we went through house loss with her because of a fire. And then all of a sudden, Dax's house also burned down. This is Dax. My place of living with my father just burned down. We couldn't afford insurance, and even worse, this happened to me while I'm out of work and job searching. So needless to say, I have a lot on my plate right now. Your donation will help me make a deposit on an apartment in a new town where I can get a job. In the meantime, donations will help me stay off the street while I look for work. Every penny goes to my survival right now, so even something as little as sharing this fundraiser will make all the difference. So it seems like, man, we got people who are having a rough time, especially that's 2 people involved in The Cultists who have had their house burned down in the past year. So, all right. I'm going to be paying attention to what else I can do to help Dax. Okay. One of our fish friends. All right, let's talk about RPG design. Let me bring up the Faded Edge document that I was working on, so we can take a look and we can talk about resistances. Let's talk about resistances, opposed rolls, and such. I am feeling pretty good this morning. I hope you are too. Okay, so we were talking about we were starting to talk about resistances. Actually, we had talked a fair amount about resistances here, because we were talking about core attributes for characters. That was our context here. We're talking about core attributes for characters. And I was trying to set up a situation where you have ability scores that allow you to affect the world. So if you are trying to take some action on the world, then that needs to be run through an ability score. We got a score that allows that to happen. We could contrast that with a resistance. Now, see, in the original Knave, when we were looking at the original, Mike says, be sure to check your outlets and equipment to keep yourself safe. Yeah, that goes to everybody. I've been thinking about that. That goes for everybody. I did some of my own wiring in my house. So yes, everybody be sure. And keep a fire extinguisher nearby. I got the fire extinguisher sitting over there in the workshop, any place like that. Do that, because I don't want to start over like that. Everybody stay safe. But the idea in the original Knave we were reading also kind of had this idea in that we could turn any type of stat into a resistance, because in the original Knave, all of the attribute modifiers, or all the attributes, were just based on modifiers. You didn't have a score and a modifier, which seems to make sense and seems to be the way that a lot of people are going. Why have a score and a modifier when all you use is the modifier anyway, like in 5th edition, basically? Why do we still have the vestigial ability score and not just the ability modifier? But then, using this idea of resistances, the original Knave said you can turn any of those modifiers into a resistance by adding 10 to it. So it's kind of getting the score back, but saying the score was the resistance. So if you're trying to prevent something from happening, that's your resistance level to prevent something from happening to you. One of the things that one thing that I was not finding very elegant, which want to work on, is that I wanted to have a very elegant list of core attributes. And it would be great to have the same number of resistances. But sometimes we had resistances which didn't seem to have a corresponding ability. Because, as we said, it's sometimes very difficult, and it seems like other games concur with this. Sometimes it's very difficult to affect the world with some things that you've got. Some things that you've got are just based around the world, or preventing the world from affecting you. Like we're talking about with health or constitution, that seems to be in a resistance. You often use it to resist things, or will, to resist mental domination or mental determination, or maybe also fatigue in some cases. These are things that help you resist, but it's very difficult to go, hey, I'm going to go affect the world with my good health. And we are talking about in the round here in general on the game side of things, but that seems to be true. And also with games like Dungeons and Dragons, where you do have Constitution, how often do you actually roll it? You're often rolling it. You're not really doing anything with it. You're often rolling it in the context of a save or some type of resistance anyway. So we had been talking about that. And then this actually went pretty well with what we were talking about yesterday, which was the basic fantasy game. No, that was not the basic fantasy. It's basic role-playing. I always say that wrong. Basic role-playing by Chaosium. And basic role-playing did have this idea of resistances. I was a little bit underwhelmed. There was some more discussion in the comments on just the general YouTube, comments about that. And one of the things that had come up was that 7th edition so it doesn't seem like basic fantasy that's now being released under the Orc is using the sort of most up-to-date version of that system that's in use with 7th edition Call of Cthulhu. I thought they were going to re-release it, clean it up. I thought this was kind of like a new edition, but it's kind of not. It's got older elements of the game system in it, and we kind of thought that 7th edition Call of Cthulhu was more elegant. And like I said, I hadn't played that, but I had read it a while back ago. And of course, we had been through the starter set, and I didn't remember all the things that, all the sort of the hurdles you had to jump that it seemed like you were having to jump in that game. So I'm not sure why they did that. Hey, PH. But then it also introduced this idea of resistances. So it was also using this idea of resistances, but it was going through the resistance with a table, right? And you had the cross-reference the table, which is fine, but it is sort of more modern games are kind of going against having the table, right? And trying not to have tables. But we had this idea here that was specifically brought up the resistance. So the topic here is resistance versus opposed roles. And so the question is, or questions are, do you need both? If you do, how do you distinguish between them? Because it was brought up also in a comment off of the, well, not live, but just the general YouTube video, that when we were having our discussion about resistances, it was brought up that, hey, you're kind of muddying the waters between a resistance and an opposed role. And I said, yes. BGD says Call of Cthulhu 7th expands very elegantly on the foundation of the basic resolution presented in basic role playing. So that's, yeah, I think so. I agree. So why is basic role playing not the one? Why is basic role playing not the most current version? Especially if you're about to do a re-release under the Orc or something like that. I thought that was what was happening. I don't get it. They must have their reasons. But at any rate, so it was brought up that we were when our discussion here last time we were on an RPG discussion is that we were muddying the waters between a resistance and opposed role. And I said yes, because that's true, because we haven't exactly discussed that yet. And it's true that we were talking about that. So, but then with the resistances, we talked about resistances and opposed roles because the basic role playing had both. And the opposed roles, it was not exactly clear to us. We tried to come up with some way to distinguish between resistance versus opposed role. And we did that to some degree. But we noticed that even within basic role playing, the distinction between those was not always clear. That it listed some things as resistances that seemed under a certain philosophy to be an opposed role. So the question is, do you need both? In an RPG, do you need both? And if you do, how can we elegantly distinguish between them? And then I would also say, does opposed roles, or do opposed roles make sense? I'm going to make a note here, simultaneous action. If I can, simultaneous action. Do opposed roles make sense? Does rolling dice in general, and this is what I want to think through, because I had this discussion on a Twitter thread with somebody who sometimes shows up here on the channel about my thoughts about opposed roles and when does it make sense for both sides to roll, and does it actually make sense from a game design perspective? Does it make sense? Does it ever make sense for both sides to roll dice? This would be something like in active defense situations. Or I suppose we could even generalize that to say, oh, running out of space here. We generalize that to say active resistances of any kind, active resistances. And you could even put up here resistances versus opposed roles versus saves. Does it make sense to have all of those things? Should some of them be eliminated? And if so, or if you do have to have multiples, if you do have multiple ones, how do you clearly distinguish between them in a game system? Oh, didn't breathe and sip. Oh, you're right. Thank you, Sable. Everybody, let's breathe and sip. I got distracted by Dax's situation today. All right. Let's take 2 deep breaths. Deep inhale, complete exhale, and then we'll take a sip of our favorite beverage. So here we go. There we go. That's the mental health portion of the show. Micah says they wanted to rush that they were under the orc license because of the OGL debacle, and Chaosium was also the one to leak the first draft half a week earlier than planned by Eric Mona. Sable Phoenix says, tied into the discussion about external and internal attributes, I kind of think if you're going to have resistances, that's what your internal attributes are for. External would be for how you want to accomplish something or change the world in some way. I think the issue that we came up with is that some of these, that sounds good, but it seemed like some of the resistances that we had needed to be were external facing as well. For instance, dexterity. Now, whether you call that dexterity or you call it agility or whichever one, if you got dexterity or agility, it seems like sometimes you would resist the world from influencing you with dexterity or agility. Sometimes you're trying to influence the world with dexterity and agility. Other times you would use that to resist. So that's why. So, can you resist the world from acting on you with your strength? Probably so. Can you resist the world from acting on you with your dexterity? Probably so. Can you resist the world from acting on you with intelligence? Probably so. And can you resist the world from acting on you with your presence or bearing in social situations? Probably so. But then there are other things too. So maybe the case is just you end up having more resistances. Maybe that's the case. Resistors are essentially a passive straining against an external factor. Opposed rolls for two or more parties seeking to thwart each other directly. So that's basically active resistance are essentially a passive straining. So this is kind of what we came up with last time, and we were talking about, because I think this was an example in basic role playing, sneaking past guards. Hiding. It was hiding. Now, we also talked about sneaking. So are those different, or are they the same things? You've got a situation where you are hiding and a guard is looking for you. Is that an opposed role, hiding versus observation or something like that? Or is that the guard's observation against passive hiding? Or is that active hiding against passive searching or something? Sable Phoenix says opposed roles make sense for things like pool building style games. If it's a straight up binary roll to succeed or fail, then no. It makes sense for things like pool building style games. If it's a straight up binary roll for success or fail, then no. James Bacon says, what do you mean by active resistance? Well, Hero Quest. You roll to attack, but then you actively resist attacks incoming in Hero Quest. You also roll to defend. Roll to attack and roll to defend. Dungeons and Dragons has passive defense, your passive resistance to being attacked. The orc attacks you. Okay, the orc rolls against your AC. That's passive resistance of the orc's attack. The game master rolls and lets you know whether or not you've been hit and for how many points of damage. GURPS is an active resistance. You get dodge, parry, block. So the orc attacks you with a sword. You've got active resistance. And you get to choose. Not only do you have active resistance, but you get to choose which resistance you're going to use. Am I dodging, or am I blocking, or am I parrying? Each with different, things that go on in GURPS. So with will, like we talked about the poison. What is your game going to do? You've ingested the poison. So if it's passive resistance, then your constitution is going to be a static score that poison has to roll over or roll under, depending on the system. But that passive that your roll has to beat. If it's an active resistance system, then not only is the poison going to roll its attack, but also you're going to roll your charisma, your constitution modifier. Okay, Sable Phoenix says, I like what Indestructiboy was saying about making player defense active. So the players both roll to attack and to avoid damage. Then you neatly tie any resistances into that. They don't have to be separate. Hiding is staying put. Yeah, so James says that the guard example is a 100% in opposed roll. Well, maybe, I mean, this is important to be talked about, because if you're trying to unify your action resolution system, do you want a different system for combat? Some games do. Like, this is how you resolve actions. Unless that action is attacking somebody, then use this system over here. I would like for that to be sort of brought under the same umbrella, so that you're using the same thing. My action is I'm going to attack the orc, or I'm going to kill the orc. My action is I'm going to jump the pit. Do you need two different systems for both of those, or do you put these together? Well, defense is necessarily active, but it's, like I said, it's not in Dungeons and Dragons. You just add up your your dexterity modifier, which your dexterity modifier is supposed to represent you dancing around and being able to avoid things, plus your armor to a net, and then boom, there you go. You end up with a passive AC, as you're sitting there that you're always roll against. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about right now. I've noticed in several games, and I want to say this was, I'm thinking about this example specifically from the Dragon Prince game, that says that you use an opposed roll if two people are trying to accomplish something simultaneously. In order to make, so you have, so they are saying, and I believe this must just come from Cortex in general, that this is by simultaneous action, that you roll opposed when you're rolling simultaneous action. So that means, but that means your game has to allow for simultaneous action. Let's say there's something sitting on the floor, like the important vial or a gun or something like that, and you want to leap over there and try to grab it before anybody else does. If your game doesn't allow for simultaneous action, then no opposed roll in that sense would ever come up, right? Because nobody is ever going to, in a turn-based game, for instance, if you're going turn by turn, if you rolled initiative first, oh, all right, I rolled initiative first, it's my turn, I leap for the gun. You're never going to need an opposed roll in that situation, because nobody's ever going to be acting simultaneously. It's only if the game system allows for simultaneous action. Okay, both you and the orc have taken, are acting at the same moment and going to leap for the gun. Okay, well then, or the knife or whatever it is. Okay, then in that case, we might have to roll, and it might be you and the orc rolling the same stat. You know, the same stat, it might be different on your character sheets, but you're rolling the same kind of check to see who gets the gun first. So, okay, there's a situation where you might have an opposed roll, but those situations only come up if you are trying to adjudicate simultaneous action. If you're adjudicating it turn by turn, nothing like that ever comes up. Yeah, I would ideally, yes. I'm trying to come up with a unified action resolution system that is going to tell you, if you're taking an action, no matter what type of action it is, here's how you resolve. Here's how you resolve it. And that way you don't have to understand different types of action. That's, to me, that's what it meant by trying to come up with a unified action resolution system. Micah says, the thing about unifying resistance and defense is a matter of what certain types of resistances are something you can actively do anything about, or passively happens. Because now, see, you could argue that the dexterity part is a active part. So if you take an active defense, you got to get out of the way. If you're talking about sword combat and you're talking about how adjudicating combat, but that something like toughness, which we kind of brought up last time, would be passive. Because you also can't influence the world with your toughness all that much. What you're trying to do with your toughness is, the orc is actually, the spear is coming at you and it is going into your flesh. Your physical toughness probably helps you resist things in the world, right? Like that spear that is being thrust inside of you. So toughness would be one. If you need to improve your toughness, then put on armor. Or, you know, if you're some kind of lizard man, you would have higher toughness. That one seems passive. Now, like Dungeons and Dragons unifies like toughness, your damage resistance, with your ability to evade, right? And so that kind of, it always limits your ability, or like it does, if you're AC 14, then it doesn't matter whether you got AC by wearing armor or whether you got AC 14 by being the really nimble dodging guy. It doesn't matter, right? It just abstracts. Once you get there, it abstracts what that means. Some people like that. Other people would like to be able to distinguish between fast fighters and well-armored fighters. Let me get out this over here. This is what, let me write through this. Barney says, let's see. Micah says, I personally still have it rolled to resist because of the randomness of dosage or precise application of whatever is requiring this resistance. Because you're not always going to get someone to eat the full amount of poison food, etc. Well, or now see if they're poisoned, depending on the poison, that also might be rolling for damage. You might be also, saying, well, you didn't eat the whole amount, or maybe it doesn't work quite as well in your body. That's rolling for damage. Could be. Barney says, I do like reactive system, but the more rolls there are, the slower the gameplay goes. That's the next thing to bring up, yes. For example, in Star Wars D6, the opposed blaster, which needs to hit the target's dodge roll, makes sense and is cool. The opposed blaster, which needs to hit the target's dodge roll, makes sense and is cool. And we don't want to underestimate the cool factor. I think this is a great point, because we don't want to underestimate the cool factor. I'm trying to move my miniatures out of the way here. I still have my army of men set up here. Let me go auxiliary. Go auxiliary camera. Let's bring up the auxiliary camera. But because I tend, my general way to go is that I tend to like active opposition, active resistance, active defense. I tend to like that. And I think that's because my first experience with games like this was Hero Quest. So you actively defend yourself in Hero Quest. And I like that. It's fun. And then also GURPS. I was big into GURPS and still enjoy GURPS. And GURPS is also active defense. GURPS has a lot of things that I like. I'm very pro GURPS. GURPS has attack. It has active defense. And then it also has it has damage. And it has armor as damage reduction. So in general, I like those things. Attack action, defense action, armor as damage resistance. Micah says, that's why I use active and passive defense. Passive is your equipped armor and natural armor assistancy. Essentially, if your lineage offers any. Active defense is that, dodging. You don't play with initiative. That's going to be a fun conversation. We don't play with initiative anymore. My group banished turn-based combat. Active defenses do avoid the D&D problem of everyone sitting and waiting for their turn to come around for 15 or 30 minutes after their combat. Yeah. Or even, yeah, it does. That's, it gives you something to do. I remember being surprised by that, oh wait, Dungeons and Dragons is just, he's going to tell me whether I hit. I don't get to dodge or anything like that. Yes, I do. We've got custom dice. And in about, I'm anticipating in about 2 or 3 more discussions, someplace in there, maybe next time, we'll be discussing the actual resolution mechanic. Barney says it's one of the reasons to hit AC in D&D is quite unsatisfying, even though it incorporates dex, armor, situation bonuses. It doesn't feel like you're actively doing anything to avoid being hit. Yes. Okay, so this right over here. But what I want to do, it's over here. So now we are on the auxiliary camera. And we're trying to think about mechanics of active. And I'll say defense right here. But this could be any type of resistance. Do you roll actively to prevent the world from affecting you? That's what we're talking about here. And in combat, that's an obvious way for the world to stop from affecting you. We did think that, from the game side, we think there's a cool factor. People tend to like it. To stop something from happening. Surely I've got another marker. I've got a purple marker. I had a blue marker here the other day. We'll see. From happening. Something from happening. But a major part of this is that it's slow. Or can be slow. Slow. Can be. Can be slow. Because if you're doubling the number of dice. Like you're doubling the number of dice rolls. Like doubles rolls. You actually have to double the number of rolls required in order to get that to work. Do you want to actually double the number of times you're going to be rolling dice at the table in order to resolve any type of action? Maybe, maybe not. Now, this is part of a part that surprises me about Cortex. We should probably take a look at Cortex again. It's not licensable, but it's a very much a toolkit kind of game. I think they designed it to be able to create a whole bunch of different franchise RPGs from it. Sadly, I believe the He-Man RPG has been canceled, but the Dragon Prince RPG got out. But we've got the Cortex and then Dragon Prince. What surprised me with that, for instance, that's active both. Actually, I need to put on here the Cortex is inspirational. I need to go back and reread some things because Cortex does inspire some of what I'm doing here. But Cortex is active defense, let's say, active any type of resistance or active opposition. We could put active opposition up here. You always roll. There's no such thing as a defined target number in that game. The game master always rolls for it. It's not even rolling to defend. Like if you're rolling to defend, the game master rolls to defend. Okay, fine, got that. That's active defense, like we see in many places. But what is the DC in order to climb a wall, or the target number, the DC to do anything? So in Cortex, you roll for it. The game master always rolls to determine what the DC of any task is. That's doubling all rolls. So that is active defense, even if the wall itself is passive. How difficult is the wall to climb up? Well, we don't know. That's not set within the game world. The game master takes the dice pool and rolls the dice and then comes up with the DC for that wall based on what was rolled. So that's not even doubling all the dice. Like imagine, like if you're just rolling for defense. Well, we can do that. We know what that's like. But imagine rolling for everything. So I really kind of questioned that for this reason. I'm like, really? In that game, I have to roll for every DC. Now, some people like that. That's rolling dice. It is slow, and it might not make sense. It might not, and we're going to examine this right here, might not or add, let's add anything mathematically. So this is a good game reason for it. This is a good game reason for it, but these are negatives, slow, and it might not add anything mathematically. If it doesn't add anything mathematically, does it matter anyway? We're going to be writing, purple marker. If it doesn't add anything mathematically, does it matter? Would you add it to your game anyway? Let's see what's going on over here. Ron Edwards Sorcerer has simultaneous action resolution. Everyone declares their actions, and then everyone rolls at once, GM included. It's a dice pool, so that means sometimes your actions fails or is canceled by the higher success of another person's action. Kind of like a gambling mechanic. I'm a big fan of simultaneous play. I am a big fan of simultaneous play. I've tried to incorporate it into my games whenever I can. GURPS used to also have passive defense. That was removed from 4th edition, but like 3rd edition had passive defense, PD. Sure did. You had armors that added passive defense as well as like armor resistance. Hey, Neutromancer. I like opposed rolls for combat. Saves seem like, hey, teddy bear keychain, good morning. Here's to you. This is the first time I think I've seen you in the chat. So here's to you. Here's to you. Saves often seem like a kind of active defense. You're rolling them. And we also need to make sure that we are clear on when you roll dice. Because like I said, sometimes it's weird in Dungeons and Dragons because that's not the unified action kind of mechanic. Because sometimes you roll to affect the target. Sometimes the target rolls to prevent from being affected. Okay, so let's see. So here's the idea. Here's my idea. So let's see if we can work this out and see if this makes any sense. Because what I was saying is that if it's true, it might not add anything mathematically. Do dice cancel each other out? Do dice cancel each other? And let's just see. Because my intuition here may be incorrect. Because we did an analysis of all the dice. Because originally I was thinking that what I would want out of this would be a 3D, a bell curve system. And when I went through all of the math on that, I realized that it was not doing what I wanted. And so I moved away from a bell curve system to a custom solution. But let's just say attack and defense. Like I said, we can generalize this to opposition or overcoming anything. But we have attack and we've got defend. How do you want to do this? Now, let's say we're rolling D20 over here to keep things easy because we're not having to deal with the math of a bell curve, and we're just saying, hey, what if we're in the D20 environment? So let's say that you're going to roll one D20 over here, and you're going to add some modifier over here. And then instead of we could have two options over here. We can have a active defense, or we can have a passive defense that's kind of more like the AC. So we could say, no, defend. Now, Hackmaster has active defense. That's another reason that I like Hackmaster, because Hackmaster does have active defense. You roll to defend yourself. So this is more like a Hackmaster kind of situation where you're going to defend yourself also by rolling a D20 and adding some type of modifier. A problem with the D20 systems is that oftentimes the modifiers are very small. So if you've got a situation which makes the games very random. So if I'm rolling to attack D20 plus 2, which is not something that's unreasonable, and this person is rolling to defend, and they are rolling D20 plus, now what are they rolling? Let's say 3. We need a way to determine how often is this person going to win versus this person going to win. Now, this is is the attack going to be successful or not? If the attacker rolls higher than the defender, let's say it's like AC. So if the attacker rolls equal to or higher than the defense, then the attack is scored a hit. If not, then the defender is won. What percentage of the time is the attacker going to win, and what percentage of the time is the defender going to win? We only have a difference of 1 here. This is doing math on lives. This might not be good. So this could be wrong, and my intuition could be wrong here. We only have a difference of +1 over here, which should be on a D20 roll. This is 5%, right? So somebody check me, is this 55% and 45%? Is that the way that it ends up? We might be able to do this on like any dice or something like that. Scrolling down a bit over here. Blade Runner has each success canceling out for attack and defense. That's like a swords and shields system in Hero Quest. Good morning, Andrew. It was, yes, it was. PD and GURPS was a modifier to your defenses. Yes, it was. So am I right about that? So let's see here. If we just have D20, let's simplify this. Just say, let's start with the most simple situation and say D20 and D20. My attack roll is a D20 and my defense roll is a D20. If the attacker rolls equal to or higher than the target's defense, then they hit. So we should be expecting this to be 50-50, right? Actually, this should be a tie. You'd be like, well, gee, who's going to roll higher? 50% of the time, this person will roll higher. 50% of this time, this person will roll higher. We do have to adjudicate ties, right? So if you hit on a higher AC, if both of you roll 20, if both of you roll the same number, so if both of you roll a 20, for instance, then the attacker is able to hit. So if you adjudicate ties in this way, then you are going to have, so this should slide in the 55%, 45%. Right? So that should be close. Sable Phoenix says the math is going to depend on if you have mobile or static target numbers too. Well, let's keep this. Well, let's keep this. We'll keep this. Let's try to keep this simple in the beginning. Any dice is amazing. Use it. Yeah, if we need it, we will break it out. I do have like dice systems. We will be looking at any dice. So if in this kind of situation, like if you just said that ties are ties, and that there, like if the defender won ties, then this would be 50-50, right? If the defender wins ties, this would be 50-50. If this were your attack system, would you want to both roll for this, or would you want to give this guy just a static defense? Because if you're saying, gee, this person's rolling a D20 and this person's rolling a D20, we've got basically 50%. So if the die roll is just a D20, why don't we just make this a standard defense of 11? Because then if the attacker had to roll 11 or better, then we're talking about 50% of the time, right? So those two are equivalent. This is what I'm talking about, whether or not these things are mathematically adding very much. Because I should be able to do the same thing. Hey, you roll a D20, I'll roll a D20. Because I've got no modifier and you've got no modifier. Depending on how we adjudicate ties, I can either just say, hey, roll a dice. And we might want to roll dice in that situation because of the cool factor. People think it's fun. This person might also like being able to roll to try to prevent this guy's attack from happening. But on the other hand, we are doubling the amount of dice, and we haven't necessarily added anything mathematically to this because we're not doing anything that we can do with just one D20, with rolling both of D20 that we can't do with just a static number. We're not getting something else out of this, right? So when I'm looking at this kind of situation, I'm going, my idea was, wait, we're rolling the exact same randomizer over here and the exact same randomizer over here. So that basically means they cancel out. They're not going to cancel out necessarily every single or any particular instance of a roll. I know that because this person could roll 7 over here and this person could roll 12 over here. But when I put the same randomizer on both sides, I'm like, what am I gaining mathematically from doing this? I've increased the number of rolls. I've doubled that. But I haven't added anything mathematically. Maybe the cool factor and people liking it is enough because you can't discount that in game design. Maybe to say, no, definitely have both people roll just because people like it, even if you can mathematically make everything do the same, make it do the exact same way, and also potentially have the amount of time it takes up at the table. If you roll the same dice plus some modifier, you will find out why DC uses AC 10 as a base. Both sides rolling D6 is a valid generator. It doesn't cancel out. So my question, though, is, so what I would go from that is, do you need the question is, if you are using active resistances, do the rolls, or do the random elements need to be asymmetric? Because I was thinking about the systems that I like both when you've got a active defense system, and it seems like they work best when you have an asymmetric system for your attack and defense, or if your attack, your action, and your response. TSL Frontman says, what is the info determination the roll is needed to settle? If it's not important, maybe you don't need more rolling. Well, we want to be sure. I want to be sure that we're only rolling in the most important situations anyway. So if it's not important, we shouldn't be rolling, I think, anyway. Neutromancer says, but you're right. You're right. The more, now that's something to think about from this perspective as well. How many rolls are you going to have in the game? How many rolls are you going to have? If you're going to be rolling a lot, like for a lot of, let's say, less significant things in the game, because you think that's fun, the game could be set up that way. Some games are set up for don't roll the dice unless there is some kind of major consequence. But let's say the game is not set up like that. Or let's say the game is first. If the game is set up like that and you're not going to be rolling the dice all that often, then perhaps rolling twice is not that big a deal, doubling the amount of dice rolled, because you're not rolling that many dice anyway. You got to think about that from the game perspective. If you don't roll dice that many times, that may be a reason to say, oh, okay, then we can afford the time at the table to double the number of dice rolls, because there aren't going to be that many anyway. They're only rolled when it's very significant, and because it's significant, the players will want to be able to defend themselves. I think that's a perfectly valid game design philosophy. But if you are rolling everything and the outcomes of many rolls are not particularly significant, then I would say don't double them. Don't double the rolls. Don't double the number of rolls necessary to adjudicate something that's not very significant anyway. So that's a great point. It's not double the time at the table. How much does that matter if you're doubling the time at the table? An important factor in that is also how many rolls are actually being made. So yes, I think that's an important consideration. Neutromancer says, I mean, D6 is a dice mechanic, not as opposing. Oh, one of the alternatives to 4DF, that's the fate dice, is D6. It gives a result from -5 to 5 with a slight curve. Gotcha. I'm talking about mathematically rolling 2 dice and subtracting is a valid generator and not necessarily a net zero. No, once it's not necessarily a net zero. No, it's not. But if you're rolling the exact same generator on both sides, so fate is one of those situations, right? So if you've got, does it matter if I just said D20, and I'm saying, hey, those kind of cancel each other out. If I put fate dice over here, if I say, if we're going to resolve this action, I got a 0, you got a 0, you roll fate dice, I'll roll fate dice. We got the same generator. And I realized this, like, does there just need, another question here is, what is the random element? What is the random element representing? What is the random element representing? One school of thought is that it's everything else not covered by the rules. We can't get into a whole bunch of minutia. We've got certain things that we are taking care of and we are specifically accounting for, but we're not going to be able to account for everything. If we could account for everything, then maybe the action would be deterministic, but everything else not covered by rules is subsumed by some kind of random element. And does that need to be one random element or two? Because if you just think about, here's the player's modifier, and here's this player's modifier. Now, we don't want this to be completely deterministic, and we want to look at amber to talk about completely, because if you just had modifier and modifier, this would be amber, or this would be diceless. Just adjudicate that without this. But we want to add in a random element. So what if we just generate one random element that determines everything else not covered by the rules? So if you're doing this plus some random element plus some random element, now you are saying that we are not covering everything. We are not deterministic. There are some elements that we are not covering, and we're going to let those things be taken care of by some kind of random element, whether that's a dice roll or not. Who rolls this? Who rolls? This is kind of, if you just have modifiers on your side and you have modifiers on your side and an attack is being made, this is kind of, in this interpretation, the random element is kind of the world, right? And so you could say, we're adjudicating this with your modifiers and my modifiers plus some kind of random element. Do you need to have plus another random element? I think in many cases you don't, because I was working on a card game that was basically exactly that situation. I had a stack of cards which were going to be the random elements. The random element came from cards. And it was the exact same. I mean, obviously, it's one deck of cards with exactly the same distribution of all the numbers inside of it. And then the player makes an attack. And he draws a card. So he's got like a +4. And then he draws a card. And then that's his attack. That's the combined total. And then the defender makes his defense. So the defender's got a modifier and then draws a card. And then the numbers are compared. And I was like, wait, why are we doing that? Because I'm drawing from two random numbers from the exact same distribution, which can potentially cancel each other out. You know, in that case, it was kind of like a fate distribution, actually. So some of them could be high, some of them could be low. I'm rolling two random numbers and I'm having to draw two cards. Why don't I just say, hey, here's my number, here's your number, and then we're going to draw a card together. That card right there is going to represent all other random elements of combat. Is what I'm saying making any kind of sense? Rolling 4DF for attack and 4DF for defense is mechanically identical to rolling 8DF for one and using the base skill as a static target for the other, which can be used for player-facing homebrew. Okay, see, that's what I'm saying right here. So why do we make one choice over the other? Because if both in that case, in the case of Fate, both sides are rolling the exact same random generator on both sides. So you're doubling the number of dice, you're doubling the number of rolls that have to be made. You could get mathematically the same thing by giving all the dice to one player, having that one roll the dice. Now you're rolling double the number of dice. You're rolling the same number of dice in both ones, but you're having the number of rolls you actually have to make and then apply it to a static target. So which one of those is better, right? Do you want to double the number of rolls, or do you want to move that and use an active defense, or do you want to move it to simplify it to a passive defense? So that's why I was saying with the asymmetry, if we've got the symmetry in random number generators, then it seems like I end up with a difficult time justifying doubling the number of rolls. That can change if your attack and defense or your action and resistance or however it is are asymmetric. Because like in Hero Quest, the number of dice you're rolling to attack changes. You've got certain probabilities of attack. Now, in this case, like damage, it's always 50-50 for any die. But the number of dice you can be rolling changes with your attack. When you're generating a random number for an attack in Hero Quest, you are using different numbers, different kinds of random number generation. And then when you are defending, that person could be defending with 1, or that person could be defending with 2, or that person could be defending with 3, or that person could be defending with 4, and that person could either be defending with white shields or with black shields, depending on whether they are a monster or whether they are a hero. So I think in this case, one of the reasons that Hero Quest works with active and defense, active defense, active attack, and active defense is because we are asymmetric with our random number generations. A potential flaw, as I've actually mentioned with Hero Quest, is that I would like for it to see it have some modifiers actually to keep the game from being quite so swingy, but it works It works completely as a game because we are asymmetric. GURPS, you are always rolling 3d6, but you are not. It makes the it does something a bit different with the asymmetry because it's harder to defend than it is to attack. So you are not rolling symmetrical attack and defense in GURPS. You roll attack and defense, but your method for calculating your defense is different than the method for calculating your attack. So you end up with asymmetry in GURPS. And so I think that system works. Hackmaster has asymmetry in its system. It's active attack and active defense, but it's like 1d. Your defense, I believe, by default is 1d20 minus 4. And if you're surprised or something, it may be d16 minus 4 or something like that. I forget exactly. I'd have to look it up. But there's asymmetry in your attack and defense. So I think if you're wanting the random element to not cancel each other out, you need asymmetry in your opposed rolls. You need asymmetry in your method to generate random numbers between the attack and defense. Barney says, I think this is what Star Wars Fantasy Flight is. Roll your dice pool, base stat skill dice, plus difficulty dice, 2 purple for average difficulty. Your defense die in 1 roll, minus your defense die in 1 roll. A card draw or singular die roll for the random element could work if it's being clearly adjudicated and choices the players made with the character creation have some influence as modifiers. Yeah, we are also, because we are caught up on, because I would say who's rolling. Now, who's rolling is something that's important to be caught up on in game design, because like we said, first of all, rolling dice can be fun, or generating your random number can be fun. We want everybody to enjoy the random number. So sometimes that's a disadvantage we set of player-facing rolls because the game master needs to do that, to be able to roll sometimes. But we also, I was saying the player who is acting rolling the dice, that's a very easy and clear mechanic. If somebody is acting, if you are taking the action, then you should be the player rolling the dice. If you're the one taking the action, the other player shouldn't defend. or if there's only going to be one roll, it shouldn't be the defender. It should be the attacker if the player who is taking the action is rolling the die. That kind of implies that the random element is part of the action, but it might not be. If the game master, if there were no such thing as NPCs and all you had were PCs, and the players designed their characters and then made decisions so they had modifiers, and they're like, okay, this character is trying to do this with this kind of modifier, and you've built your character this way, and you built your character this way. We're in this situation, and then we've also characters have made certain choices, or players have made certain choices to put the characters in different situations, which may make it easier to accomplish this task, or like it flanked the opponent or something like that. Player decisions. I like decisions that the players make to influence what's going on here. If the player is making a decision, we can adjust situational difficulties or situational modifiers, and then the game master, as a neutral arbitrator of everything else that's not covered by the rules and random stuff that's happening in the game world itself, will add a random element to this and then see what happens. But we associate action. This is the player's role, which we could break, and you just have to break that philosophy. You're just splitting the rolls, but you're adding a die. Same way that 3d6 gives a different result than 1d20, other than just the caps being different. Yes. So what I'm saying is that rolling 1d20 is different from 2d20, or 1d20 minus 1d20. I think I'm with you there. Yeah, I think I'm with you there. Sable Phoenix says, food for thought. The most really successful game designers for existing systems, just food for thought. Most really successful game designers design for existing systems before making their own. Kelsey with Shadow Dark, Terran with Vagabond, Ben with Knave. They also built an email list by doing this so they could launch an established player bases. Yes, so also talking about marketing here. Marketing is definitely important, especially if you're going to crowdfund something. Yes. where was I going with this? Where was I going next? So, okay, let me give you an example of a system that I think does this badly. This is not an RPG system. So let's do this. Let's give an example of why I don't like Frostgrave over here, because I think this game does two things different. Two things, or has two elements that we've talked about that's done badly. I know this game. Does anybody play Frostgrave? Did I say Frosthaven a moment ago? I meant Frostgrave. Does anybody play Frostgrave? I know it has a very dedicated player base, so I know a lot of people like it. I wanted it to be the new Mordheim. But everyone that I played it with didn't like this game. And there was something, because I think there's something about its combat system that is not right. So let's take a look at playing the game. Combat, 35. This is a warband game, so you should be doing a lot of combat in it. Okay, and so I would expect also kind of a sophisticated combat system for this, at least reasonably complex. Micah says, the thing about a card draw or single die quantity of dice rolled is that it can help it work for solo play or play with less arbitration by a singular player. We did talk about the importance of cooperating with solo play, or this playing nicely with solo play, or play with less arbitration by a singular player, letting it rotate who does it. Imagine a system where an attack roll is 4d6 and the game master tells the player, this once, instead of me rolling all the dice, you roll 2d6 and try to roll as low as possible. The player feels active. Because there's a difference. Like, we're talking about passive versus active in the game world, but then also there's passive versus active actually players sitting there at the table. Okay, so how does Frostgrave handle combat? Here is Frostgrave's combat, and this is why I think this game falls down. Once a figure is in combat with an enemy figure, it may spend one of its actions to fight. In a fight, both figures roll d20. Okay, so this is active defense. Both figures, it says both figures, but of course it means players. Players rolling for both figures roll d20 and add their fight stat, plus any additional modifiers that may be relevant to determine their total scores. The figure with the highest total score wins the fight and may inflict damage to an opponent. To determine damage, subtract the loser's armor stat from the winning figure's total score. If the result is a positive number, then that amount of damage has been inflicted. If it's a 0 or negative number, no damage is caused. If damage was caused, this amount is subtracted from the loser's health stat. Okay. So this is trying to be active here. Both players. So we've got attack and defense. And I want variety also in my warband characters. I got, better combatants. I got worse combatants. But how are we doing this? Active attack is d20. Roll 1d20. Defense is roll 1d20. And then both sides add a modifier. So both sides are rolling the exact same number generator here. Okay, well, now what type of modifiers do I have? Maybe that's the key. Let's go over here, though, and take a look at our stats for most characters. So this one's got the same random number generator on both sides, but then let's also take a look at the fight scores running down here for each one of the different kinds of characters. Thug, +2 fight. Thief, +1 fight. Archer, +2. Crossbowman, +2. Infantryman, +3. Tracker, +2. Man-at-Arms, +3. Treasure Hunter, +4. Knight, +4. Templar, +4. Ranger, +2. Barbarian, +4. Apothecary, +0. Marksman, +2. This game has a wide random number generation, which is going to make this game very much dependent on what number you are rolling on this die. You're rolling, it can get anywhere from 1 to 20 over here, and your modifiers are very low. They're like the D&D stat modifiers. It's +2 and +3. Occasionally you go as high as +4. But even plus my knight, when my knight is fighting the worst guy, he's only 20%. He's only got a +20% if the knight is fighting the apothecary. All right, he's got an advantage of 20%, right? When the knight is fighting an infantryman or a man at arms, he's only 5% better. So none of our characters are actually that much better or worse than anybody else. This is a highly random game over here. So we've got the exact same random element on both sides, and we have also the exact same or very close to the exact same modifiers also on both sides. So you are rolling. It's a highly random game. It's a highly random game that doubles the amount of dice rolls necessary. Hey, I'll roll a d20 and add 1, 2, or 3 to it. You roll a d20 and add 1, 2, or 3 to it, and we'll see which one of us wins this fight. I found that very unsatisfying because it's highly random, and the skill, and it doesn't really consider the skill of the characters. I like the games. Now this is a warband game, not a role-playing game, but I still like for like the skill and the statistics of the particular characters that are involved to be a large part of the deciding factor of whether they are successful at something or not the random element. So this one right here is high randomness, very low influence of skill. But it is active and it's active defense. But I think this is why this game still even feels unsatisfying. You're like, hey, this is active defense. Cool, I get to roll to defend myself. But you're just compiling a random factor on top of a random factor. You're not actually that much better at defending. And even though this game has active defense and my experience with this is not enough to keep the players involved because there's no asymmetry. And we just know that, hey, this is randomness. You could just be flipping a coin, or, hey, you roll high, we'll roll one die. High, I win, low, you win. Just adding active defense to a highly random situation doesn't help. Let's see what's going on over here. Yeah, see, it depends on what you're meaning by this, because we're talking about, when I'm using the word active, I'm talking about active. Are you making a roll for it? But yes, it's supposed to include active. Well, it's a passive score, but it's a passive score at the table as part of the game. It's a passive way to run the game, but it's supposed to take into account the character itself being active. Yeah, passive in-game versus passive at the table. Yeah. Barney says it's almost like a more swingy version of Warhammer 40K, D6 to D20. That could have been my problem with 40K as well. I only played 40K once, and it didn't grab me because it's also very swingy. Now, also very swingy and random, and it seemed like games were going in this direction, and I was like, this kind of sucks. I thought the strategy battle game, the Middle-earth strategy battle game, because I was like, all right, I really loved Mordheim. Maybe what we're getting is we're going to get, because it was supposed to be like a skirmish game or something like that. I was like, maybe we're going to get a really cool Middle-earth skirmish game or warband game or something like that that's on the level of Mordheim, and man, I'm going to be all about that. But it ended up with, you've got fight values. In fact, in that way, it's even worse than this because you've got fight values in Middle-earth. So somebody might have a 2 fight value and a 5 fight value. But in order to decide who wins, you roll a d6 and the opponent rolls a d6. So that's active there as well. That's active on the skirmish game level. And then if we tie, the person with the higher fight value will win. That game is largely about how well you roll dice. It doesn't matter if this person can be Aragorn over here and that person can be the orc over there. And the only edge that Aragorn has is that he will win ties. PH says that when you're talking about a skirmish game, it makes sense to have both rolling. It's not the same as an RPG. I think I can argue both ways. There's a paper that you should be able to find with a Google search called Tabletop Role-Playing Games as Procedural Content Generators that might be helpful here. Oh, hey, Pan Smith. We're going to be wrapping up here soon, too. Absolutely great show. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I need to get to work. Okay, so anyway, so that was, let's see, was looking at the comments. Was that my thinking on this subject? Did that cover basically everything that's been in my mind as I've been trying to develop this part right here? Let's see. Neutromancer says, I just don't see the problem. I just don't see the problem with both sides rolling the same die versus one side rolling 2d20. And I don't think the players feel like it's pointless. Even using HQ, that's Hero Quest style dice, you can include crit hits as well as crit defenses, possibly blocking additional effects on top of damage. Yes. And I think I would do more of that if I were creating a Hero Quest style game. Descent tried to do that. You get more variety because it says I would like more static modifiers in Hero Quest, but I would also take advantage of more dice types. And Descent started to take advantage of more dice types. Let's see. You think it has something to do with scale as well, James? I think random dice rolls dictating outcomes by themselves become less and less. I think random dice rolls dictating outcomes by themselves become less and less satisfying. The smaller the conflict, massive warbands is fine for random outcomes. Skirmish is less so. RPG is a non-starter. I think I can also argue that. I could argue that the other way, I think, as well. Because if you say, like, let's talk about the effects of like hit points, or like you're taking damage. You're taking damage of some kind. The more you aggregate, or anything, the more you aggregate anything, the more predictable I think it should become, or arguably the more predictable that it should become. So if you've got one person and they're taking damage, when is that person going to fall? Well, it's very difficult to tell, like in any one particular situation. But once you start aggregating over 100 people or 250 people in a unit, I think it becomes more mathematical. Let me give another example that'd be better. It's like when I'm thinking about randomness increasing the smaller number you get, or the smaller you're dealing with. We deal with this. This is like a geographic intelligence analysis. Say you've got to find, your job is to find a tank. And you know you've got rough terrain, and you've got open terrain, you got rough terrain, you got roads, you've got very difficult terrain. Where is it? Where is this tank? Well, that tank could be anywhere, because any one tank might even find its way up into the very difficult terrain and up into a firing position. But now, if I am trying to find an entire division of tanks, the chances of that division of tanks being in the very, very rough terrain is very low, because the division of tanks is not going to be able to find its way. It's not going to be able to find its way into a place that maybe one would. So I think you could definitely argue that the outcome of a massed battle could be. I would expect less randomness in the outcome of, 40 an entire platoon, or an entire 40 missiles into an entire unit, than I would with one missile into one thing. You see that in like Warhammer, or even Kings of War, where you're rolling mass numbers of dice. Like in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, you're using more dice, but that actually makes it less random. It's more and more approaching the probabilities of your unit's stats. If you're just rolling one, well, that number could be anything. But when you pick up 15 and throw them, you're getting mathematically closer, theoretically, Any die roll can still be anything. But overall, you're getting closer to that unit's mathematical statistics. But I'm not using that. Like, I'm not using that. I'm trying to reduce randomness. That's one of my design goals, is even at this level. So, I mean, I think I could argue that the randomness either way, but I'm trying to make the randomness smaller, even for this. I would try to make the randomness smaller, I think, in different kinds of games I design. But I'm definitely trying to reduce randomness. That was the design goal. Right, yeah. So, okay, so I think that is everything that's been bouncing around around in my head. So let me tell you, based on that, where I was going in the last minute. So these things over here are basically what I was thinking of. Cool factor, because yes, many people, it seems like over here, like active defense or active resistance, or like being active to prevent something being resisted on. Okay, so I feel the same way. People like that. Okay, but I am sensitive to slow. I think if I were doing this up here, I could fix slow by by reducing the number of die rolls in general. So slow could be fixed by that. But I am still trying to get around, am I actually doing anything mathematically interesting or different with this dice roll? So that's why I had set up resistances, or was trying to move resistances to being something static. If the idea is that if you are the person who is acting, you need to roll the dice. What is the difficulty in this task where you are trying to do something to this other person? Or it wouldn't matter whether you're trying to do something to another person or if you're trying to do something to this wall. What's the procedure? What's the resolution mechanic? I'm trying to knock down this. Does it matter if it's person or door? Does it matter? I want to knock down this, person or door. Should the mechanics for doing that be different? Either way, you're trying to knock something down. Because I can give the person a passive resistance score, which sounds like it would be strength or something like that. That is your size. Oh, you want to knock that person down? Well, then here's their resistance score. On the other hand, oh, he tried to knock you down. He rolled a that. Can you roll a something else to defeat that and stay standing up? If the door is there, hey, I want to knock down that door. It has a passive score. Seems to make sense. If it were, and I'm going to knock down that door. Should it also have an active roll? It would in Cortex. The game master would have to roll for the difficulty of that door. The door would get a roll. Does it make sense for the door to get a roll? Sable Phoenix says, if you're trying to push so hard into reducing randomness, why have randomness at all? Well, that's what somebody always says. What's the reason for having randomness in your ideal system, and why curtail it? Okay, so well, we're going to look at the completely deterministic. Like maybe we do that. Maybe this is the perfect way to follow this discussion with Amber and diceless role playing. So we take a look at that system. But this is a good question, because some people will say, well, just go play Amber then. Okay, because like, what is the purpose of randomness in the game? The purpose of randomness in the game is to account for everything else not covered by the rules. Because I don't think there's any way, like I would say, there's not any way that we can adjudicate everything that I consider in this game. And it is a game. This is not a simulation. So because we cannot take into account everything that would influence the success or failure of a particular event, we have a random element to this. We have a random element, so that's built in. So we don't have to. Now, is this +1 or is this -1? Another -1 over here, because I don't want to do accounting for every little thing that could possibly cover success or failure. So we come up with some big things that would govern success or failure, and then leaves everything else and say everything else is covered by this random element. That's what everything else is covered by this random element for. I do think that there is an element of risk. Now, maybe on this, I change my mind. If I read Amber and I'm like, man, this is just absolutely fantastic. This is perfect. It's a completely deterministic role-playing game. There is no element of risk here. I think I only want randomness in certain areas when a character is uncertainty. In ideal conditions, you may be able to accomplish something, but in less than ideal conditions, it becomes uncertain. And those less than ideal conditions are your adventuring conditions. Now, I was told somebody recommended that I not use like adventuring conditions. Somebody in the comments said, this was a few weeks ago or whatever, that don't use adventuring conditions. Instead, use the phrase under pressure. So if you are under pressure, then it becomes uncertain, that you have an element of uncertainty, which is governed by the dice. If that made sense. Because I don't think that for those reasons, I don't think that you eliminate it. But like this over here, this system over here, that Frostgrave system, which is very close to D&D, with its same random generators and very low number of modifiers in general. D&D, I guess, over here uses a passive AC score. Frostgrave has you roll for it. Way too much randomness. Way too much randomness. I want people to understand what they're good at and to actually be good at it. Okay, Sable Phoenix says, all of this has been very interesting, but it seems to me that it's gone into the weeds trying to look at individual numbers before a reason behind the numbers is firmly established. I may be wrong, though. Randomness smaller is more or less getting a bell curve. Modifiers affecting more greatly and affected by player choices and having additional modifications to the dice modifier or not swinging. Now, that go back if you're interested in all the analysis on the bell curve and the reason why I decided to abandon it, because I thought that was the answer. I thought the bell curve was the answer for the reduction of randomness and the increase of the players and making the player's skill be more meaningful. I thought that was the solution. We broke it all down. And unfortunately, the bell curve does not help as much as you think. This is what I was trying to think of here. Let's just say you've got a DC. This could be a DC of 15 or an AC of 15, whatever you want to call it. You got a DC 15, AC 15, whatever. That's your roll you're trying to make, and you've got a 0 modifier. This is the way that I was thinking of it. You're rolling D20 plus 0. What percentage of the time? My question is, what percent of the time is the outcome determined by the dice? Outcome determined by dice. That's what I was thinking of when I was trying to reduce randomness. In this situation, what percentage of the time is the outcome of the action, whether it's an attack or whatever it is, determined by the dice? And in this case, it's 100% of the time. If you're rolling D20 plus 0 at a DC 15, but this DC could be anything. Sometimes the dice are going to tell you success, and sometimes they're going to tell you failure. But in this situation, you are 100% random. The dice are in control. And that's why if you do something like a +1, okay, +1, what percentage of the time do the dice control whether or not you succeed versus your skill? The dice are still 95% of the time determining your success. Only one time was your skill, when you rolled a 15, only one time was your skill able to turn a failure into a success. So even with a +1, so if you go up to +5, this is still highly random, because that would be what, 25%? 75%, even if you have a +5 modifier, because some people will go, no, sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons, you can get up to +5, +7, +8. In certain situations, you can get higher than that. But I mean, if you're talking about in general, people playing 0 to first level, what are your modifiers like? Even if you get to +5, you are in the dice's hand, the hands of the dice, 75% of the time. Right? So what happens then if you, and this is what we broke down, because we broke down the math because the math gets more complicated when you get to a bell curve system. But if you say, okay, wait a minute, you're right. This situation sucks. I need my modifier to be much more important. Let's change this to 3d6 and let's make that plus 3. Let's check to see whether this is plus 1, plus 2, plus 3. Of course, if you're plus 0, you're still 100% random. 100% random. Now, it gets more complicated because you're rolling on so the difficulty of what the randomness is depends on your TN and stuff like that. We broke all that down. See the dice rolls. Look up bell curve on my channel, D10, 2D20. People had me go through a bunch of different dice. There was a several video series where we did that. You can look at all the stats over here. It does help. It helps reduce the effect of the die roll, but it doesn't reduce that effect nearly as much. It doesn't affect it nearly as much as I wanted it to. You still end up with a lot of randomness in the system. And so that's when I made the realization that you've got to invert this situation over here. Basically, you invert this situation over here. Instead of your random number being D20, you need high static numbers. Like this guy has a 16 and this guy has a 12. And then instead of rolling a random number, if you want to reduce randomness, then let's say D6. Now, maybe in that case, you've got the same random number modifier on both sides. You got D6 over here, but we're adding 16 plus D6 and 12 plus D6. There. Now we've reduced randomness. That reduces randomness. Your skill is now much more important. The randomness, the gap between how much skill you've got and what your random element went from random element up here and small skill went to big skill over here and random element. That's how you do it. That's why I abandoned the 3d6 or why I abandoned the bell curve. In retrospect, that's obvious, but I had to go through all of the math in order to make that connection, because I don't see that very often in role-playing games. I don't see that very often in games at all. It's always big random numbers, small modifiers, or generally that's what you see. And even when it was talking about in the 3rd edition Unearthed Arcana, I'm sure that's why I started to go down that route. It's because like, what is the effect on Dungeons and Dragons if you move to 3d6 and start to have a bell curve? And it said one of the things is to reduce the amount of that it reduces the amount of randomness and makes skills more important. It does, but not nearly as much as I want to. So that was the conclusion that I came to, and my thoughts about how I want this to go with active or passive defenses and randomness and resistances and such. Sable Phoenix says, I explored the same exercise. What I arrived at is the randomness is fun. And so the result of a dice roll should be fun or interesting. The dice should only be cast when important. Dice are sometimes randomness is fun. Sometimes randomness is fun. Sometimes it's the opposite of fun. Because I'm trying to avoid the situation in game design where somebody makes all of the right choices. They make all of the right choices and they fail because of some random element. They just happen to have a bad dice roll and then ended up losing the game or whatever. Now, winning and losing, or, if you're talking about an RPG, you did everything right to kill this dragon. And then because there was so much randomness in the game, even all of your correct choices couldn't overwhelm the randomness. Making damage greater than AC, like to hit, could really help 5e. This was great, Heath. Thank you. So we will, I think next then we should look at a completely deterministic game and see what that's like. Because we know what a highly random game is like. But I've never played an RPG where it was completely deterministic, where there was no random element. We say diceless, but some will be diceless, but they'll use cards for randomization. Talking about completely without a random component. So I think we should check that out, because that will. We've seen highly random games. We know highly random games. What is it like? How do you do this if there's no randomness? Micah says, Under Pressure makes sense, and it's an awesome collaborative song. That's why I got all of that ready. I made that cut yesterday because we're probably going to need it when we're talking about Faded Edge. D&D 5e decided to dispense with the details and make you roll twice, advantage, disadvantage, to hit an AC or DC, which is the least satisfying solution to the problem, in my opinion. Yeah, how much that... Yeah. The lock is too rusty to pick. We want to have a discussion on this subject as well later, because the roll is random. Like, to me, this also has something to do, or would be related to, a fail forward kind of approach or something like that. But the simulation is usually balked because pre-established reality has been altered. So my idea, so adding pressure in situ like combat or being discovered doing stealth action will add to the DC. If you're adding pressure, I'm going to have to do, I can't do this because I don't want to do subtraction. But my idea was, okay, if your skill block is this big, so here's your skill block, and this is telling you what kinds of stuff that you could do. The more pressure, so this is like ideal performance. If you got plenty of time, let's not say ideal, but let's say standard competence. This is your standard competence right here. You can be expected to accomplish tasks up to this. But if you start putting that person under pressure, then there becomes uncertainty on this end, an increasing amount of uncertainty if they're going to be able to perform to that top level. If you put them under this much pressure over here, there becomes this gap on this side that becomes the uncertainty, which becomes the randomness. They're still going to be able to accomplish things in here. The more pressure, the more it's uncertain whether or not you're going to be able to achieve the upper level of your expected competence. That's kind of my thinking. Looking through here. Yeah, and I worked on also, Micah says, bell curve still leads toward the center, even if there's some randomness. Modifier is indeed still something that needs to be more important. Yes, and I still, even after that, I looked for other ways to incorporate the bell curve into it, and it was still wrong. We'll talk about that too, because yes, that was another thought that, well, okay, now maybe you just the higher modifier, and can I come up with a way to generate a much smaller bell curve? But that still didn't work. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Yeah, see, it's possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That's not weakness, that's life. I understand. But like it's possible to commit no mistakes, and if another player still beat you at the table, you didn't make any mistakes with let's say you played optimally, but another player still beat you because of their decisions. That's one thing. If you played optimally and then we're still overwhelmed by randomness, that sucks. Oh, Charlie also came up with that. Okay, well, I got stuff to do. Especially, hey, see you tonight. Tonight we're doing Moana. I think it's going to be a great dive into the hero's journey and how it could possibly relate to the heroine's labyrinth. So if you like stories and you like storytelling and you like movies, hey, be with us tonight. So we will be here with Doug and also Lou tonight. So I'll put that up on YouTube, but then I will also put it up on the Discord server if you are here, so that you know exactly when it's beginning. I typically post an announcement with the Discord server about 15 minutes before we're going live. So that will be there, but also check it out. Check out the Discord server. Please make sure you've liked and subscribe, but then also everybody be constructive, be creative, be constructive, and grind on. I'll see you tonight.